You could feel it before you even saw it. That pressure in the air, like the kind that coils in your chest just before lightning strikes. Somewhere between the flashing lights, the screaming crowd, and the tension crawling across the arena walls. Something told you this night wasn't going to end the way anyone expected. And then it hit. A thunderous punch cracked through the air like a sledgehammer against steel. The sound didn't just echo, it ripped through the crowd like a war drum. A split second later, a man, seasoned, respected, broken, crashed to the canvas, flat, motionless. The referee dove in immediately, waving off the fight, checking vitals. And yet, before the stunned gasps of the crowd had even settled into silence, the victor had already begun his parade. Arms high, chest out, sweat pouring down his smirking face like it was applause. He strutted past the cameras like a rock star who just burned down the stage. He didn't even glance at the man he had just dismantled until he circled back, leaned in, and shouted a string of insults right into his fallen opponent's face. Loud, cocky, cruel, no mercy, no remorse. Just pure showboating. Some fans cheered, loud, feral, entertained. Others, they shifted in their seats, faces tightened. A few glanced around, unsure if they were watching a sport or an ego spiral. But down at ringside, in the front row where the camera hadn't yet zoomed in, he sat. Dwayne Johnson. No entourage, no sunglasses. Just the most famous face in action cinema. 53 years old, calm as stone. Arms rested, expression unreadable. No cheers, no smirk, just a steady gaze, locked like a missile onto the young fighter still soaking in his own self-made spotlight. And then, something changed. Maybe it was the way the fighter's eyes flicked over. Maybe it was the recognition, that unmistakable stare watching him, unblinking. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was insecurity. But the moment that cocky fighter spotted Dwayne Johnson in the crowd, the atmosphere shifted. You could feel it ripple like a cold wind sweeping through a packed room. Because this wasn't just any celebrity watching from the sidelines. This was The Rock, a man who built an empire on grit, grind, and a level of cool under pressure that made villains hesitate and audiences cheer. And he was watching, silently. Why? Why was he here? Why wasn't he reacting? And more importantly, what happens when a man with nothing to prove is suddenly dared to prove everything? The question didn't hang in the air for long. It was about to be answered, and the entire arena was holding its breath. The fighter was still catching his breath, his chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. But his ego, it was breathing just fine. He grabbed the mic like it was a victory torch, his grin spreading even wider as he soaked in the spotlight. Then, with sweat dripping from his jaw and adrenaline pulsing through his veins, he turned and pointed. Not at the crowd, not at his opponent. He pointed straight at the front row, straight at Dwayne Johnson. "You think you're tough in your movies?" the fighter shouted, voice echoing off the walls. "Why don't you step in here and show us if it's real?" A beat of silence, just one. But in that breathless second, something electric snapped through the arena like a live wire. The crowd gasped, loud, unified, spontaneous. Then, like waves crashing in slow motion, murmurs began to spread. Whispers, shock, then cheers. A ripple at first, then louder still. Fans began to rise from their seats. Some turned to each other in disbelief. Others began to chant, softly, then building, "Dwayne, Dwayne, Dwayne." The moment turned molten. The fighter stood tall, smirking like he'd just detonated the room on cue. His swagger fed off the crowd's energy like a parasite, bouncing lightly on his feet, nodding toward Dwayne as if to say, "You want some of this?" He knew exactly what he was doing, calling out a legend in front of tens of thousands on live. Cameras in the heart of the fight capital. This wasn't a stunt. This was a provocation, and still, Dwayne didn't move, he didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just sat there, still as a mountain, his eyes locked on the fighter with a stare. So calm it felt like pressure, real pressure. The kind that doesn't need to shout to make its presence known. The fighter kept dancing on his toes, trying to provoke him again. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue? Or are you only tough when there's a script and a stunt double?" Some fans laughed nervously. Others glanced toward Dwayne, unsure of what they wanted more, to see him explode or to see him ignore it all. But that was the thing about Dwayne Johnson. He didn't do cheap. He didn't perform when poked. His silence was the performance. And right now, the tension he created by doing absolutely nothing was louder than the fighter's mic. Still, the chants kept coming. "Dwayne! Dwayne!" They rolled over the arena like thunder, some excited, some skeptical, but all waiting, hoping for a response, a move, a nod, a single breath that would say, "Let's do this." But Dwayne held his ground, hands still, shoulders relaxed, face unreadable, and slowly you could see it happening. The energy began to shift. The crowd started noticing not just what was being said, but what wasn't. That maybe, just maybe, the real power wasn't in the fighter who shouted, but in the man who stayed silent, the one who didn't need to rise to every bark to prove he still had teeth. And for a split second, the entire arena held its breath again, not because of what the fighter said, but because of what might come. Next, the young fighter was still riding the wave, basking in the sound of his own voice, as if he were the main event, the headliner, the show. He circled the cage like a peacock on parade, raising his arms to stir the cheers, laughing into the mic as if his words had already won the next round. "Come on, Rock," he called out with a sneer. "You've been sitting there all night, acting cool, but you think this is a movie set. Think again. This—" He stomped the mat beneath him. "This is real." Cameras panned sharply toward the VIP section. Dwayne Johnson, still seated, hadn't shifted an inch. One arm rested casually on the side of his chair, the other on his leg. His face was a masterclass in control. No smile, no scowl. Just that unshakable stare. The same one that once silenced rooms full of execs, the same one that used to glare across wrestling rings before bodies hit the mat. Now, it cut across an arena like a blade wrapped in calm. The crowd was restless now, divided. Some roared, egging on the fighter, thrilled by the drama. Others stared, phones raised, wondering what it would take for Dwayne to respond. And then something began to shift, so slight, so slow, it was almost imperceptible at first. Dwayne Johnson moved. Just a breath, a shift of his weight, the turn, over shoulder. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't staged. But the moment it happened, the atmosphere cracked. The chants returned, louder, sharper. "Dwayne! Dwayne!" The volume climbed like a fuse was burning down toward something nobody could predict. He stood, not fast, not dramatic. He stood the way a lion rises, not to threaten, but to remind the room who it belongs to. He removed his jacket with the ease of a man who'd done it 1,000 times before, handing it to a nearby crew member, without breaking eye contact with the fighter in the cage. The movement was surgical, intentional. The entire stadium leaned forward as one, thousands of eyes locked onto one man who still hadn't said a single word. But he didn't need to. His body spoke for him. His presence was louder than the fighter's mic could ever be, the young fighter noticed. Oh, he noticed. His grin stretched further, giddy now. "Oh, he's actually standing now," he bellowed into the mic, pacing toward the ropes. "Looks like the big guy does want to play." Laughter rolled across pockets of the crowd, but it was uneasy now, tension hiding in every breath. Some fans were unsure whether to keep cheering or brace for impact. Even the security staff around the cage had stepped back. No one told them to open the gate. They just did. And still, Dwayne didn't rush. He walked toward the cage, like he was walking into a room he already owned. Each step deliberate, smooth, and yet somehow heavier than anything the fighter had thrown all night. Phones lifted, chants surged. The crowd felt it now, something rare, something real, not a promo, not a stunt, something alive. The fighter raised his arms again, feeding off the noise. "Come on, give your action hero a round of applause, folks. He's gonna need it," he shouted, tossing the mic aside and bouncing on his feet like a showman rehearsing his next big scene. Dwayne Johnson entered the cage. No music, no hype crew, just that silent presence that made everything else feel small. He stepped in and squared up, no grand gesture, no stance borrowed from the movies. Just planted feet, calm breath, steady eyes locked only on one man. The air thickened. You could hear the heartbeat of the moment thudding through every person in that stadium. Because when Dwayne entered that ring, the show ended and the real story began. The arena had never felt quieter. For a place packed to the rafters, with bodies shoulder to shoulder and hearts pounding in sync, it was stunning how still it became the moment Dwayne Johnson stepped inside the cage. There was no bell, no referee standing between them, no official announcement, and somehow none of that was needed. The young fighter, still brimming with adrenaline, bounced lightly on his feet. His smirk hadn't left, but it had shifted. Just a little. Less cocky, more curious now. He tilted his head, watching Dwayne with the amused expression of someone who still believed they had the upper hand. "What's the plan, big man?" he taunted, voice rising just enough for the microphones at the cage's edge to pick it up. "You gonna throw one of those movie punches? Maybe a spinning kick for the cameras?" Dwayne didn't flinch, didn't blink. He stepped forward instead, one foot, then another, not fast, but steady. With each inch, the distance closed between them. The crowd leaned forward in unison, as if gravity itself had shifted toward the center of the cage. Phones were everywhere now. Flashlights flickered like distant stars. But inside the cage, it felt like time was dripping slowly. Thick as syrup, the two men now stood face to face, inches apart. The young fighter still bouncing, still trying to shake the nerves off with bravado. Dwayne, solid, unmoving, calm, the kind of calm that comes from years of battle, real and metaphorical, from knowing your own strength so well. You don't need to display it unless someone forces your hand. The young man threw one last jab, this one verbal. "Better hope the director's watching," he said with a smirk. Still nothing. That silence. It was louder than any scream. It said, "I don't need to prove anything to you, but you're about to learn something you won't forget." The crowd felt it. All of it. The shifting of tone, the weight in the air, the tension so razor-thin it could split atoms. For a moment, it was as if no one dared breathe. Then, snap. The energy broke. The young fighter lunged. There was no referee to hold him back, no script to follow. He charged with all the force of a man who believed he had something to prove, fists flying, feet light, adrenaline surging like fire in his veins. Left hook, right jab, a sharp snapping kick. It was fast, it was ferocious, and it was wild. But Dwayne, he moved like water. Every punch that flew toward him sliced through nothing but air. Every kick missed its mark by a breath. He didn't overreact, he didn't flail, he slipped, he weaved, he flowed. His shoulders rolled with precision, his feet shifted with veteran grace, his eyes never leaving the fighter, even for a heartbeat. The young man was throwing heat, fast and hard, but nothing landed, not even close. And slowly, the crowd started to see it. Dwayne wasn't just surviving this onslaught, he was dismantling it, not with power, with patience, with discipline. The fighter kept coming, punches snapping, sweat flying, trash talk slipping through gasps of breath. "Come on, Rock, hit me, let's go!" Still, Dwayne didn't answer. His body did. He began to touch back now, nothing flashy, just calculated counters. A stiff jab to the ribs, a subtle parry to a hook, a small step that let the young man overextend. Then a clean redirect that made him stumble. The rhythm shifted. The crowd felt it. The fighter didn't notice, not yet, but the tempo wasn't his anymore, and Dwayne, he was just getting started. The young fighter was relentless, but he was starting to look rattled. His grin, once wide, confident, arrogant, was tightening. At the corners, his breath came heavier now, his movements just a little more rushed. He danced on his feet, trying to keep up the act, but the show was unraveling. Because no matter how fast he threw his punches, no matter how sharp his kicks landed in the air, nothing, absolutely nothing, was touching Dwayne Johnson. The Rock wasn't blocking because he had to. He was avoiding because he chose to. Each movement from him was purposeful, effortless. Where the young man's fists came wild and emotional, Dwayne's counters were quiet storms. Tight, sharp, efficient. He wasn't trying to match the chaos. He was dissecting it. Every swing from the fighter was met with something different, not just defense, but an education. He ducked under a left hook, moved just enough to let the blow graze empty space, and countered with a jab to the ribs. Not hard, not flashy, but enough to make the younger man wince. Another wild uppercut. Dwayne sidestepped, slipped in close, and with surgical precision delivered a clean counter to the shoulder that sent the fighter stumbling half a step back. And the crowd noticed. Oh, they noticed. The cheers changed. Less for the fighter now, more for the spectacle, more for the control. People in the front rows began whispering to each other, realizing what they were witnessing wasn't just unexpected, it was legendary. Inside the cage, the young man blinked through sweat. He wiped his brow, his jaw clenched tight. The smirk was gone now, replaced with something else, frustration, confusion, a quiet panic. He circled, trying to recalibrate, trying to find the rhythm he thought he'd owned just moments before. But Dwayne hadn't just stolen it. He'd rewritten it, and then it happened again. A spin move, fast, ambitious, desperate. The younger man launched into a spinning kick, hoping to catch Dwayne off guard. But Dwayne had already read it. He closed the distance with eerie precision, stepping inside the arc before the kick could land, and delivered a crushing elbow to the shoulder that threw the fighter off balance once more. The audience gasped. Some fans jumped to their feet, others clutched their phones tighter, fingers tapping furiously to capture every second. The fighter staggered back, his breathing jagged now. Gone was the showboater who taunted from behind a mic. What remained was a man realizing, too late, that this wasn't the stage he thought it was. This wasn't just a fight, it was a lesson. The younger man came again. Of course he did, because the last thing to leave a man like that is pride. He charged in with fists flailing, trying to land just one clean hit, something, anything to restore the illusion. But the rhythm was broken, his tempo was off, he was chasing shadows. And Dwayne? He stood patient, focused, waiting for the perfect moment. Every fan in the stadium could feel it, that invisible pause before a thunderclap, that hair-raising tension when you know something's coming and there's no way to stop it. The fighter roared, swinging wild, wide, sloppy. One more punch, one more burst of everything he had, and Dwayne stepped forward. The younger fighter came in roaring, fists wide, form sloppy now, no longer the sharp technician who had dominated earlier, but a desperate man swinging at ghosts. His energy was unhinged, wild with panic and pride. He wanted to reclaim the narrative, to shake off the humiliation, to prove, if to no one else, then to himself, that he still had control. But control had already shifted, and everyone in the building knew it. Dwayne waited, not frozen, not afraid, just ready. He didn't flinch when the left jab came. He didn't retreat when the right hook followed. He didn't panic when the fighter rushed in, trying to finish with a sweeping uppercut designed to end the story with a dramatic punctuation. Instead, Dwayne stepped forward. In one smooth, powerful motion, faster than anyone expected, cleaner than any choreographed scene, He unleashed a right hook that landed like a hammer. One single devastating strike. The sound it made wasn't just a punch. It was a punctuation mark on silence. A full stop on arrogance. The younger man froze mid-motion. His knees buckled, his eyes widened in disbelief, and then, like a puppet with its strings cut, he collapsed. Hard. Face first onto the mat. The entire arena went dead silent. Not quiet. Silent. No cheers. No gasps. Just the sound of cameras clicking and a sea of stunned faces trying to process what had just happened. 1 second, the fighter was taunting, throwing bombs. The next, he was out cold, sprawled across the canvas beneath the lights he thought were shining only for him. Dwayne didn't raise his arms. He didn't strut. He didn't pose for cameras. He simply stood over the fallen fighter, expression unreadable, breathing steady, posture calm. The crowd, stunned into stillness, finally erupted like a dam breaking. It started in waves, a few chants, then louder still. "Dwayne! Dwayne! Dwayne!" Every row in the arena was on its feet. Phones were pointed in every direction. Flash after flash lit the air like fireworks. Commentators tried to speak over the chaos, but their words were lost beneath the deafening chant of a crowd that knew they'd just seen something legendary. Dwayne gave a subtle nod, glanced once toward the VIP section, then turned his back on the fighter and walked toward the cage gate. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, not from exhaustion, but from impact, from meaning, from the kind of silence that doesn't ask for respect, but earns it with ease. Behind him, the fighter still hadn't moved. Medics rushed in, crouching beside him, voices sharp but calm. "Can you hear me?" one of them asked. The fighter nodded weakly, eyes blinking up at the overhead lights. His body moved sluggishly, dazed and hollow. His balance was gone, his pride shattered. The crowd wasn't watching him anymore. All eyes were on Dwayne, the man who never said a word, never answered a single insult, never reacted to the chaos, and yet had flipped the entire script with a single, perfect punch. It wasn't just a knockout, it was a reckoning. He didn't look back. That was the part no one forgot. After the knockout, after the crowd lost its collective mind, after the cage door swung open and medics rushed in, Dwayne Johnson didn't glance over his shoulder, didn't wait for applause, didn't seek a camera. He just walked, slow, steady, unbothered, out of the cage like a man who had nothing left to prove, and never did to begin with. Behind him, chaos buzzed like static. Medics hovered over the fallen fighter, checking his vitals, guiding him slowly, carefully, back to consciousness. He blinked, dazed and slow, barely registering the lights above him. The crowd's chants were still going. "Dwayne! Dwayne!" But those cheers weren't for him. Not anymore. He groaned softly, rolled to one side, tried to sit up. Sweat poured off him in sheets, soaking through the towel now draped across his shoulders. His balance wavered as 2 medics helped steady him on a stool in his corner. The confidence that once pulsed in every step was gone. The bravado disintegrated. What remained now was something quieter, something sobering. The crowd was still electric, but the energy had shifted entirely. No one was asking for a rematch. No one was shouting insults or laughing at Dwayne anymore. The phones, the cameras, the voices, all pointed one direction, toward the man calmly walking toward the exit tunnel, jacket draped over one arm like it had never left him. He didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the chants, didn't even slow down. Because for Dwayne, this wasn't a performance, it was a reminder. The fighter watched him go. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Not yet. His jaw ached. His ribs were sore. But the pain wasn't just physical. It was deeper, colder, the kind that seeps in when you realize the moment you thought would define you ended up redefining you entirely. Around him, the arena buzzed. Fans leaned over barriers trying to get one last glimpse of The Rock before he disappeared down the tunnel. Commentators scrambled to put words to the moment, but their voices were drowned in the ongoing roar of a crowd that had just witnessed something they'd be talking about for years. Social media lit up like wildfire. Clips of the knockout, stills of Dwayne standing over the fighter, headlines screaming, "Dwayne Johnson silences the loudest fighter in the game," without saying a word. And yet, the man at the center of the storm just kept walking. Back in the cage, the fighter finally stood, slowly. His legs trembled slightly, but he stayed upright. Cameras zoomed in on his face, hair tousled, eyes unfocused, the smugness gone. He looked around, but the faces in the front row weren't looking at him anymore. They weren't chanting his name. They weren't cheering his theatrics. They were watching Dwayne. Even as he disappeared into the shadows, his presence still filled the room. The fighter's lips parted, maybe to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to make sense of what just happened, but no sound came, just a low breath, a long exhale. He sat back down slowly, towel still clutched between trembling fingers. No mic, no spotlight, no comeback line, only silence. Because the thing about arrogance is, it's loud, it boasts, it brags, it mocks, but when real presence enters the room, arrogance has no voice. And now, for the first time, the young fighter finally understood the difference between noise and power. Long after Dwayne Johnson vanished into the tunnel, the arena was still buzzing. Not from a fight, not from a spectacle, but from the aftershock of witnessing something that defied all expectations. No one had seen it coming, no one had planned for it, and no one, absolutely no one, could forget it. Back inside the cage, the young fighter sat slumped on a stool, towel draped over his neck, eyes locked on the floor, like it held the answers he no longer had. His chest rose and fell in heavy, uneven waves. Around him, the medics stepped back slowly, giving him space, not just physically but emotionally. There was no microphone in his hand now, no taunts left to throw, no crowd begging for more, just silence and reflection. He rubbed his jaw, wincing as his fingers passed over the spot where Dwayne's punch had landed. That one hit, that single, surgical strike that changed everything. Not just the outcome, but the perception. The fighter had entered the cage convinced this was his show, his stage, his night. But now, he was just a man sitting in the ruins of an illusion he'd built too fast and too loud. He looked up, scanning the crowd. Some people were still clapping, but most were watching their phones, replaying the knockout over and over again. The footage had already gone viral. Millions of views pouring in by the second. Headlines dominated every social feed. Dwayne Johnson KOs, trash-talking fighter without saying a word. From blockbuster star to real-life legend. But the fighter wasn't reading headlines. He was sitting in silence, feeling something heavier than bruises. Humility. Because what happened out there wasn't just a loss. It was a lesson. The moment Dwayne stepped into that ring, he never once raised his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't posture. He didn't perform. He simply was. Controlled. Focused. Unshaken. While the young fighter threw noise and spectacle into the air, Dwayne answered with silence, and then with action, and it landed harder than any taunt could ever hope to. What the crowd saw that night wasn't just strength. It wasn't just a knockout. It was a masterclass in presence, in restraint, in the kind of quiet discipline that doesn't seek attention but commands it anyway. Dwayne didn't have to prove anything, but he proved everything. Because real fighters, they don't just talk, they show. And for every fan watching from the stands, from their phones, from across the world, they understood. Strength isn't in how loud you are. It isn't in how flashy your moves look on camera. It's not in the mic grabs or the trash talk or the social media posts. Strength is calm. Strength is control. Strength is standing still while the world tries to provoke you and waiting for the moment when action speaks louder than words ever could. That's why the crowd chanted his name long after he was gone. That's why no one cared about the flashy entrances or the mic drops anymore. They remembered one step, one punch, one man who walked in silent and walked out unforgettable. So if you ever find yourself in a world that values noise more than truth, ask yourself this: do you want to be the guy who screams for attention, or the one who lets his silence drop like thunder? Because as that young fighter learned, you don't demand respect, you earn it. And that night, in that cage, in front of thousands holding their breath, Dwayne Johnson didn't win with words. He won with presence.